Hi, everyone. I hope you're doing great as you're tuning in. What I have for you today is, I think, a particularly important episode. And I do want to let you know that we will be touching on sensitive topics in today's conversation. I'm really happy to welcome back to the show violinist and advocate Lara St. to discuss a topic that has been prominent over the last few months in the classical music sphere: the devastating effects of sexual abuse in our community and the inadequate response of organizations to it. We have, of course, heard about many specific events over the past several years. And as you might know, a recent article referring to a situation at the New York Philharmonic was the catalyst for that conversation to grow rapidly and for a mobilization to shape up. The article I'm referring to was written by Sammy Sussman and was published on vulture.com on April 12, 2024. I have a link to the article in the show notes. I highly recommend you read it. And I'm including information from the article here to give you a little bit of background. This article describes how horn player Kara Kaiser was allegedly drugged and raped by two members of the New York Philharmonic back in July 2010. Kara had won a position as assistant principal and utility horn with the Philharmonic earlier that year and was, as such, not tenured. As you might know, to win that type of position is a feat in itself for anybody. But to put you in context, if you're not familiar with the type of challenges women often have to face in the orchestra world, she was only the second woman to win a job in the Philharmonic's brass section in the organization's nearly 200-year history. Amanda Stewart was a trombonist at the New York Phil at the time. She was the only other woman in the brass section, and she was also new and not tenured. And she was the only colleague who publicly supported Kara's story. Sadly, both women were denied tenure after speaking out. The two accused tenured members were fired in 2018, but they were reinstated in 2020 after appealing to the union, which decided in their favor. They played in a philharmonic until this latest article came out in April 2024, after which they were suspended again. And this investigation is still ongoing. Now, why did this particular article create such a whirlwind? There had already been rumors about the situation in the community, multiple rumors, and there had been articles about the situation already back in 2020 that I remember reading. There have also been multiple incidents involving famous, highly regarded musicians over the years that generated a lot of anger and frustration. So I think we were already on the verge of a tipping point. And what I think was different this time is that thanks to the thorough journalistic work of Sammy Sussman, we got all of the shocking details of what happened then and how both Amanda Stewart and Kara Kaiser were treated in the aftermath. And this vivid picture that was painted, coupled with the dedication of several advocates, like Lara St. to keep the conversation going, generated a passionate response from our community. Sussman wrote his article based on interviews with Kaiser, her friends and colleagues, and law enforcement officials. He also reviewed more than 200 pages of documents from the Vail Police Department and Colorado's 5th Judicial District Attorney's Office. Sexual misconduct in the classical music world is something that we hear about more and more as people come forward and speak up, thankfully. And I think we have reached a point where we say no more. And thanks to the advocacy of people who have been vocal on the topic, this story has become a catalyst for things to start moving at a faster pace. Finally, or at least, I hope. I'm thinking of people like my guest today, Lara St. People like Catherine Needleman, who's been writing about equality and, as she puts it, saying the quiet part out loud for years. And the many more courageous women who have come forward so far. This story shook me and shook everyone I've been speaking with. And it was really important for me to bring this conversation here on the Mind Over Finger podcast because one of my main missions with Mind Over Finger is to help create an environment where it's safe for all musicians to evolve, where everyone is given a fair chance, where everyone has the freedom to pursue artistic fulfillment without harm. Now, having shared all this, let's dive into my conversation with Lara. Lara was my guest already for episode 85 of the podcast. In that episode, we discussed several aspects of practicing and performance preparation, as well as her own experience of sexual abuse at the Curtis Institute. In today's conversation, Lara and I talk about the power dynamics and gender issues in the classical music world. We discuss the context and impact of sexual abuse, the lack of representation, and how women often don't get the support they need. Lara shares her own experiences, and she stresses the need for institutions to step up and create a safe space for everyone by being transparent and having clear steps to handle sexual harassment and assault. Finally, we touch on the difficulty of addressing these issues in a society that often prefers to stay silent. I hope this episode proves to be helpful for you. Be sure to listen until the end, where I will share resources that I believe can be useful, including information about great initiatives that are happening here in Chicago and being spearheaded by members of the Chicago Federation of Musicians. Without further ado, let's dive into my conversation with Lara St. John. Lara St. John, thank you so much for being here today. Lara, you're a powerful advocate for victims of abuse, and you have shared your own experiences to bring awareness of this issue. And I feel like your insights and dedication to changes are invaluable. And I'm very grateful that we're able to have this conversation today.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, it's important. Very important to talk about this. Yeah.
Lara, can we start with talking about this complex dynamic of power and authority and vulnerability and how that works and in our classical music field?
Yeah, well, I think it kind of is a profession that, as we all are beginning to know, is rife with a lot of abuse, particularly child abuse, because there are very few professions where you start so young. I mean, if you don't have like 5-year-old accountants or 10-year-old physicists. So, but of course, as you know, for violin, for cello, for piano, a little bit less so with the winds and voice, but you have to start before basically 6 years old. And also a ridiculous amount of, I guess, deification or power, and in my opinion, way too much respect is given to people in positions of power over children and over
Yeah.
students. I mean, at any age, actually. And a lot of people have abused that power by, trying to take what they want from children, from women to I mean, and also some men, obviously, as we know. But yeah, it's really I guess it just kind of maybe attracts those people, like for example, Stephen Ships, who's now in jail. For 40 years, he basically did what he wanted with all of his students, and everybody just looked the other way. Um, as you know, I came out in 2019 about my own rape as a child at the Curtis Institute in Philadelphia, and that was by my major teacher, and it was done under threat of kicking out me and my brother from the school. So that amount of power, I was 14 years old. What am I supposed to? I didn't know what to do, and so things had to happen. And of course, it's basically it's a life sentence once that kind of thing happens to you as a child, and it's really hard to deal with. I have spoken to many women. A lot of people reached out to me after that article in 2019, hundreds, I would say, with similar stories. And I would say more than half of them are no longer in the field. So then you get these people that are like, well, where are the women? And it's like, well, a lot of them get abused out of the field. And it's unfair that there isn't an even playing field for women in classical music. They're expected to just kind of, I don't know, deal with it somehow. And what actually ends up happening to a lot of people is that your love of music becomes ruined. And so a lot of women just leave the profession, and that's really disturbing, and it's a terrible thing
right? Because
because
there's so much trauma attached to it.
there's so much trauma, and also we're not getting that creativity that would have happened if they were dealt an even playing field. And so basically you end up with a lot of mediocre men in their place. If you think about the places where, I mean, I guess violin is more or less probably one of the most equal in gender, but if you look at conducting or composition or people in leadership positions, it tends to be about 95% male. And that means that if we assume that basically talent is equal among the genders, that makes for 45% of those are mediocre men who have a very vested interest to keep women down, because they know very well that they wouldn't have a job if women actually were given an equal playing field. So that's just something that we have to and all of it is related. It's all intertwined, like violence against women, exclusion of women, which happens a lot, and then the lack of them. It's all related, and it's something that we're gonna have to just keep screaming from rooftops, because I felt for a long time that I was kind of screaming into the void,
Mhm.
and now finally people are listening. I mean, I reported it to Curtis when I was 15 years old, and they mocked me, they laughed at me, the dean, Robert Fitzpatrick. The present guy, who's still the director, astonishingly, even though he lied to me, he obfuscated, he tried to bury everything, he tried to shut up his alumni. His name is Roberto Diaz. He's still the president of that school. Um, so, even if publicly the guy did a whole bunch of really bad, stupid, wrong things, he still got his job, because you can't. There's a man in a position of power. Nobody can do anything. So, and my rapist, even though everybody at Curtis knew, he taught till he died, another 11 years, and then he died happily in his own bed. Nothing ever happened to him.
Mm.
So that's ideally what can now stop, is that more people coming out is is helpful, because it's never just one person. These men they spend lifetimes doing this to women. And I heard from one woman, actually. I'm sort of like jumping from one thing to another, sorry about that. But one woman got in touch with me, and she said, oh yeah, he raped me for a whole year when I was 15. This is my guy. And that was in 1950.
Mm.
And she was now 80. Well, she'd be in her 90s at this point. But so he's been doing this his entire life, and yet nobody could do anything about it.
There's so many great topics that you touched on that I really want to unpack and get into all of this. And what you just said, I think, is a good starting point where this dynamic teacher student is so, well, I don't want to say unique because it exists in other fields as well, but this one on one relationship
Mm-hmm.
where there's so much, I like the word that you use, deification. There's so much idolation. And we
Yeah.
want to emulate these musicians that we see as so incredible and
Right.
inspiring. And there's this relationship that is in place where grooming can be done so easily.
Exactly.
And when I feel like there's a lot of bias, conscious and unconscious too, and I would love for us to
Mhm.
open that door today so that people like me, working in institutions, people working in unions, we can all start to see where we contribute to the issue
Mhm.
and where we can start to help, because there are so many misunderstandings about what happens. So, this person, it happened over a year. A lot of people would wonder why, but that's because there's a lack of understanding of this toxic, powerful
Mhm.
context and circumstance. Can you talk to that a little bit about what are some of these common misunderstandings or these biases about sexual abuse in general that people might have?
Well, one of the biggest problems, I think, is the institutions who do everything they can to protect themselves and the predators at the expense of the students. You could see that with me with Curtis for 36 years. They only finally apologized to me because I forced it. I forced like them to get an external report done, which found me entirely credible and horrific things happening at the school all these years. And so the institution, I mean, they would have loved it if I had just like got hit by a bus or something. They probably would have thrown a party in the Zimbalist room or some crap. As you can see, there's no love lost between myself and that school, and I think it's for pretty good reason. Um, but yeah, like you see the institutions and what they do, like the Cleveland Institute of Music, for example. Everybody knew about Bill Prusel, right? But what they did was they just in 2007, and this is 11 years before the big article came out about him in the Washington Post, they just paid for the student to go to another school. So this is what the institutions do. They remove the student, or they remove the student from the learning position, so then the student no longer has any kind of advantage. So
Right.
basically it's victim blaming at the highest level, really. And it's removing, like, it's getting rid of this, like they just don't care about the students. All they care about is their big fancy men and protecting the reputation of the institution. So what I would like to do, me and Catherine Needleman and some other people who are very vocal about the lack of women, the abuse of women, and also the exclusion, um, what I'd like to do is make it so that the institutions, so that their reputation is enhanced when they do these things, when they actually say, oh, we should do background checks on these men. Oh, we should listen to women when there's rumors. We should go check that out. We should,
Mm.
if I would want them to be proud of transparency. And that's what I want to happen in my lifetime. Is for these schools not to be like just, there's so much shoving under the carpet. I mean, you see it everywhere. In Canada as well, Montreal, this the Schulich school at McGill, all sorts of crap goes on there. And they've known about it for years. Juilliard, everybody knew about Shapiro. Everybody knew about the clarinet player, whatever. Everybody knew about Bob Beezer. And he was still there until last year when Van magazine came out about that big article about the composition department there. They wouldn't have done anything if it hadn't been for people finally, using their voices.
So it's really a culture of silence and of victim blaming where the victim ends up feeling like if they express themselves, they will be punished for it.
Right, right. And that's the whole point of what we're doing in music. We're supposed to love this music and express ourselves. And it gets, frankly, for a lot of people, it gets completely ruined. I mean, I've spoke to some women who don't even listen to music anymore.
Mhm.
And for me, I don't know, maybe because I started so young, I was 2.5, that it didn't get abused out of me, I guess, because I continued in the profession or whatever. But you just I it's a slippery slope to think this way, but at 14 years old, I was on, such an upward track. And then, it just became about survival,
Mm.
suicide attempts and all sorts of stuff. And I think what saved my life eventually was, ridiculously enough, leaving Curtis as soon as I could when I was 17 and moving to the Soviet Union. I mean, I know that sounds kind of like really funny, but it just got so much room between me and that stupid school that I was able to kind of pick myself up and start again. But if you think about it, I was never. I'm sure you and many people who listen to this podcast, like their close friends and colleagues and everything, were made in university, or at college or whatever. And I was never really allowed to have that situation. Like I had to leave because it was killing my mental state, just to have to see that person like a couple of times a week, probably. Just like, I mean, I would memorize his schedule and try to avoid it, but it was just, it's and just to see that went unpunished, whereas I had to pick up the pieces, I guess, of
Right.
my sort of wrecked childhood self. And that's just not effing fair.
Yeah.
And I know that it's still happening in various places in various schools, and these schools are still doing the same damn thing. And, when it came out about Stephen Ships, this was a, I know I'm jumping from person to person because I know so much about so many schools and so many people at this point, but the Michigan suddenly like spent $1 million to put little windows in every room. Why were they not there in the first place? Why are there locks on studio doors? Why are there not windows? Why are there? It's still the same situation. Royal Conservatory in Canada, there's locks on the doors and there's no windows. Same thing for McGill. Same thing for, well, University of Michigan until 2018. The one place that's really doing it right, in my opinion, is Amsterdam, the conservatorium there. Every studio is glass. It sort of is a transparent building. It was built that way because of a very brave girl, Masha van Sloten, who did a complaint in 2001 about Jan Repko, who was kicked out of Amsterdam and I guess took a boat and got 3 more jobs in England for 20 more years.
Mm.
And his trial is coming up in July in London. Um, but that's because Birmingham Royal Conservatory, the Royal College of Music, and Cheatham's in Manchester, which is actually for children, not one of them picked up a phone and said, hey, Amsterdam Conservatory, why did this man leave? Not one of them. So 20 more years he had great fun abusing students, and only now is he, getting a bit of comeuppance. And so because of that, when Amsterdam Conservatory rebuilt their building, they moved out of the old building and built one. It was done with no locks, with complete transparency. And the head of the Amsterdam Conservatory there, his name is Oka Westorp. I think he's fantastic. And like, he's like, I hear something, I go talk to them, I listen, I this, I that, like he's sort of the shining beacon of hope, in my opinion. I think
Yeah.
he's really great. I spoke to him. I'm working on a documentary. I'm kind of nearing the end of it now. And I've gone and spoken to a lot of these people, a lot of the women, but also folks like him. Like, he's doing it right. People should see that it can be done.
Right.
And I don't know what the hell is wrong with the States, honestly, and Canada, and actually England, actually everywhere, except for
Pretty pretty much.
this one sort of conservatory in Holland.
You
But
use the word transparency. It feels like literal and figurative transparency are going to be is going to be the answer for this. You also talked about survival, and I would like for you to tell us more about what can we do? I think some of us don't know. What can we do when we hear from a friend, from a colleague that they're experiencing this? I feel that all of us should be more educated in
mm,
a course of action. What do we do?
well, I mean, ideally there is something in place at some sort of Title IX officer or something like that at a school or at an orchestra that you can approach. But the problem is a lot of these places are so small. Like if you think about Curtis, for example, you wouldn't be able to talk to somebody without them knowing who, without, the problem is that again, these people have so much power that if it got back to them, they would be able to blacklist you. So that's why a lot of people do stay silent.
Right.
Um, and it's understandable. Obviously it is, you're whatever you're old you are, you're about to embark on a career, which is it's in a very small profession, very rarefied. And if your teacher, tells his friends, oh, she's difficult to deal with or something like that, that could afford you probably, to lose auditions or to lose competitions and stuff like that. It's so prevalent that you could be blacklisted and so easy for the people in power to do it that a lot of silence is achieved that way. And I think if people know that this is happening, you can't force people to come out about it because they see how hard it is, and they know that this may affect their career. Um, but certainly to listen and to, to try to help that person as much as possible, because I can tell you it's hard as hell to
Yeah.
go through that kind of thing from, especially from your major teacher, especially if you're in a very vulnerable position, which obviously I was as a child and from a poor family. You know, Curtis is a full scholarship school. That kind of power that one person can just kick you out. So that's another thing that these schools should do is they should have, and this is Amsterdam as well, they should have team teaching so that no one person has complete power over any one student. Um, you know, I don't see how that would be a bad thing in any case, you know, like it's always good to play for more than one person. So all that kind of thing. Curtis only last year made it a rule that you can't teach at home anymore.
Hmm.
Amsterdam did that in 2005. You know, it should always be teaching one-on-one should always be in a studio situation in a school. It should never be at someone's home where, you know, it's just so much more possible to abuse somebody if it's at a home and not in a studio situation. Um, so then a bunch of piano teachers, they blame me publicly for them not being able to teach at Curtis anymore. Gary Graffman, because he's in his 90s, he can't travel to Philadelphia, so he says it's my fault that he's no longer teaching at Curtis. Um, that being said, he also, you know, knew about all this stuff way back then, so I don't really care what he says. And Yefim Bronfman has told a bunch of people that it's my fault, and I don't know why he can't get his butt to Philadelphia, but for some reason it's my fault. So they no longer teach at Curtis, which is something that should have been a rule forever. You
Yeah.
know, you shouldn't teach one-on-one at home, and certainly not if it's children.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm
I,
proud
I
of that. I'm proud of that blame. They can blame me as much as they want. If they've got a problem with that, they shouldn't be teaching.
and that really illustrates the importance of speaking up when one feels ready to do so and how it can be life-changing for everybody else. And I feel like that's why it's important for us to really pay attention to, classmates, colleagues in school or colleagues in the workplace, that when they show some signs or they use some words, that we
Yeah.
pay attention and we make sure we're there to support them
Yes.
emotionally, and also perhaps with more than words, but actions as well. As we saw recently, sometimes you get punished when you support someone after they've reported events.
Right.
And I think it might require a little more courage from all of us as a collective.
Well, one thing that gives me a little bit of hope actually is I have the feeling well, you know who Sammy Sussman is. He was the one that brought out the case against ships at University of Michigan, and of course, this most recent New York Magazine article about Kara Kaiser and Amanda Stewart, the New York Phil, about her drugged rape there. Amanda stood up for her, and so they denied both of them tenure and basically kicked out the women where the men were allowed to continue with their jobs and even got back pay. So, anyway, that's another story which I encourage everybody to go read that article because it was those women were failed at every possible instance. First by the DA in Colorado, second by the New York Phil, third by the union, the local 802. So it's a terrible, terrible story, but it has got people talking. So that in itself is very good. Sammy, I spoke to for my film, and he told me, I think he's maybe 25 now. I mean, he's like a totally different generation from me. And he said that as opposed to the people who sort of knew about me, but just, well, if it didn't affect them, they didn't care, right? Like it's like, oh, well, you know, I know this teacher does this to people, but I'm a guy, so it won't happen to me, or, you know, he's not doing this to me, so it's okay. I had a lot of that. Um, he says that the younger people don't feel that way. They feel as though if this is being done to somebody, that is wrong. Like they have a much sort of greater sense of solidarity against the people in power. So, I mean, I hope he's right. I think he might be actually, because I've seen that kind of reactions from younger people. Like they're like, okay, well, this doesn't affect me, but I don't want to be in an institution that allows this, you know, and that kind of reaction is what I want. from everybody, because then only together can people get together and go against these men in ridiculous amounts of position of power. You saw it a little bit in Cleveland Institute this past year, how the student body, they all stood up for each other.
Mhm.
And I thought that was great. I mean, obviously the the dean or whatever he calls himself, president or something, is uh not doing good things for that school, shall we, to put it very mildly. And unfortunately, it's kind of a mess right now, but I was very impressed with the students
Mhm.
to stand up for each other like that. Because obviously, it was only a couple of the women that were being mistreated, but they all, as a student body, stood up for each other. So that's the kind of thing I really want to see happening.
Yeah.
And, you get these, obviously, the internet makes everybody a commentator, and you get these comments that, like, oh, well, these people are just going to um, accuse men because they don't like them or something like that. This never happens. I mean, it just doesn't happen. You see what happens to people when they do come forward about these things, and nobody would do that for fun.
Yeah.
Nobody, you know,
Yeah.
it's just certainly not as children, which
Yeah.
happens a lot. And I think a lot of those commentators are men who are scared of, losing their jobs or something like that. And I'm kind of like, well, what's in your closet? Why are you saying stuff like this? Honestly. And as we saw also with the New York Phil story, there are kind of quite a lot of complicit women as well, which really does kind of hurt. Like in the wind section or whatever, there were people who blamed Kara for
Mhm.
getting drugged and raped, and some of them were women, um, which is that's particularly disappointing when that
Mhm.
kind of thing happens. But eventually she got her story out there, and it's certainly being talked about, which is fantastic. And actually, next week I'm leading a protest along with Catherine Needleman to get the New York Phil to release her, to dissolve her non-disclosure agreement,
Mhm.
because that's another thing these people do, is they get
Right.
women to sign these things so that they are effectively silenced for life. And I mean, it's just such a misuse of
Right.
non-disclosure agreements. It's ridiculous, it's pathetic, and and other people who were abused or raped by the same men are unable to speak. Hmm.
And in the workplace now, there definitely are a lot of trainings because of government regulations on what we should do, how we should behave at work, in regards to sexual harassment at work, and what the recourses are if we feel that we've been a victim of sexual harassment at work. Some of the recourses are now made more easily available, or at least there is some sort of procedure that seems to be in place that we are aware of. But also, then, what happens once you start the chain of actions in the workplace and you put in an official complaint, then what happens?
Then
There's
what?
just no way to know because human beings are in charge of the procedures at that level. And I'm hoping that the events that we are being made aware of right now, happening everywhere,
Mhm.
can just allow for things to change and for people to stop looking the other way and
Mhm.
for people to stop trying to hide this. I mean, I'll use that word again, the transparency needs to be heightened everywhere.
Mhm.
What do you think?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's ideally that would be the case, that somebody would be able to go to, I don't know, a Title IX officer without any risk of retribution. Now,
Right.
retribution is the problem, and so that's why so many people are silenced, because they know that if the teacher finds out, they're going to be on the next jury, they're going to be on the audition panel, they're going to, or their friends will. It's really an old boys club, buddy buddy kind of thing. And especially in the brass world, in winds, in and a lot of the orchestral instruments, it's very, very heavily skewed male. And that's not a pipeline problem. That is a fact that, they invite their friends and they, don't allow for women to be part of this buddy buddy situation ever. So yeah, it's just I've been learning more and more about this thanks to Kara, thanks to Catherine. I kind of had my head in the clouds a little bit because of not really having to be a member of the union. I don't, I don't really work on Broadway or in orchestras, and so to fix that, I went 3 weeks ago and joined the local 802 because I want to know what's going on. And I
Right.
want to go to these meetings and I want to voice my opinion of what they did by representing two predators to get their jobs back in 2020. Um, like the union was saying, oh, well, we have to support all of our members. That's actually not true. They do not have to. They could have chosen to do the moral thing and not back to well-known predators and give them their jobs back, but they did. And so they said, well, but if we hadn't, then they would have sued us. Well, guess what? They're getting sued anyway by these two predators. So the local 802, really, they just did a lose-lose
Right.
situation. And they should clean house. Definitely. There's something very wrong with that kind of a decision. Um,
Well, I hope it's a wake-up call for all
yeah.
unions everywhere that there needs to be some policies in place and a lot of awareness, a lot of education,
Hmm.
and a lot of, I'm gonna say it again, maybe last line, but transparency.
Transparency. Yeah. Yeah. Well, also I think with if if one hears about something or say a friend or even a rumor of oh, this guy is handsy, or don't be caught in a room alone with this guy, I mean, that's what people said for years about Dutoit. Everybody knew you don't let your kid get anywhere near James Levine. um all the girls knew about Prusel. Like, everybody knew this. If you hear this, like, listen. That's the best thing, because it's never just one person. And so if it is more people, then together, those people can possibly make a difference, and somehow, you know at the very least, like, what I mean, I can't fix what happened to me, I can't go back, but maybe I can make it so that this won't happen in the future, right, to some other 14-year-old girl. And that, to me, would be worth it. It's a thankless job. It's kind of like, planting a tree, but you'll never get to be in its shade, I guess. But
Right.
at the same time, it's the only thing I can do is to try to stamp this out, because I mean, we all love music. It's why we're in it. And stop ruining this for 51% of the population,
Yeah.
you know?
At at the human level, what do you recommend we do to offer support to our friends who are trying to survive, try to overcome going through an event like this? Because sometimes I think there can be some discomfort as to what to say, what to do. So, can you shed some light on this for us so that we feel comfortable going to our colleagues and friends and classmates for and be there for them?
I guess, like, listen and believe,
Mm,
because that's another thing that, you know, I know from speaking to Kara Kaiser that people would just say, well, I don't know, I've known him longer than you, so I'm gonna believe what he says. I mean, it just it defies belief what some of these people said to her at that time. And honestly, like I said before, people just don't lie about this kind of thing. I mean, it's too horrible. Why would you? There's absolutely no advantage to
right.
having been harassed or abused. Nothing. There's no advantage to coming out about it. Nobody wins anything, you know. But if you don't come out, then it festers,
Yeah.
and it comes out in some aberrant fashion. For my film, I've actually spoken to sons, former fiancés of people who have committed suicide because of sexual abuse in music schools. So, you know, it has to just listen. That would be my first thing. Listen, believe, and if there's any possibility of some sort of action, try to take it and just
Mm,
support, support these women and and some men. We shouldn't forget that kind of thing. I mean, I don't know how many young lives James Levi ruined, and that was men. And David Daniels, who now pleaded guilty to rape, um, abused lots of kids at University of Michigan. You know, and it was thanks to Samuel Schultz who came out about that because he heard that David Daniels was getting tenure at University of Michigan, and he thought, well, this guy and his husband raped me way back when. I am going to come out about this because I don't want this guy to have tenure because he's just going to keep doing the same thing to young men at University of Michigan. So Samuel Schultz became public about it, and eventually, I guess it was about a year ago now, David Daniels and his husband pleaded guilty to rape, aggravated assault, and they are sexual predators. They have to be on the registry for the rest of their lives, et cetera, et cetera. At one point, and this really, really disgusted me. David Daniels wrote something on Facebook, and he said, "Oh, I sound like a foghorn, but guess what? I got some work in Europe. Isn't that great?" And hundreds of people, well-known people in the opera world, like all congratulated him. This is 2 days after he pleaded guilty of rape for rape.
mm,
2 days, and everybody was like, "Oh, that's such great news, David Daniels! Wow, I can't wait to hear you again." You know, well-known people in and educators. It really, for me, that really beggared belief, and it was just, I mean, how do you think that feels for Samuel Schultz, who just came out about this, and then to see all of these people back up a rapist? So don't be those people.
yeah.
Don't be Susan Graham.
And
Don't be Stephanie Blythe, because that is just, that's a terrible thing to do.
I like what you say about support and believe.
Support and believe. For example, it was recently pointed out to me that there are quite a lot of women in the Philadelphia Orchestra, in other orchestras, who still have my rapist's name on their bios. So, what does that say to me? It says either we don't believe you or we don't care. And I think it's more we don't care, because I had a substantial amount of proof. I had two witnesses when I went into the dean. Um, I think that probably everybody believes me. Everybody knows that Yasha Brodsky was a horrible guy, and it was totally believable that he would do such a thing. But they don't care. He probably taught those women something, and they're like, okay, well, this is, I want to have this on my resume because it's important to me, or
Mhm.
whatever. How do you think that makes me feel? I know
Right.
you don't care, ladies. Thanks. You know, for the guys, it's one thing. I can't. I wouldn't overestimate men to take him off, but for the women, it really is ugly.
Mhm.
Actually, it's ugly for everybody.
Yeah. Must be difficult.
Well,
How?
they know who they are. So, and also, even, they reached out to a bunch of people for that Philadelphia Inquirer article, and some violinists who studied with him who are younger than me said, well, it didn't happen to me, it couldn't have happened to her. And everybody knows their fathers went to every lesson with them and packed up their violins for them till they were like 30. So, well, congratulations. But, what you're doing is saying, well, it's my fault, or that I'm lying, you know,
Right. Yeah.
that I somehow brought this upon myself because it didn't happen to them.
Right.
So, you know, don't be those girls.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm sure you know
Because
what I'm talking about. If not, you could just go and look at the article. Google my name and the Curtis Institute of Music, and you can see those violinists who are very well known quoted as saying, "Oh, yeah, that couldn't have happened to her. No, because it didn't happen to me."
and that's the thing is so s- different people will have access to a different type of recourses or resources or support.
Mhm.
So if it were to happen to someone right now, young person in school, What would you recommend they do if they don't know what to do? This happened to them, they don't know who to talk to. What can they do?
Well, one thing that people are definitely doing is reaching out to people like me or Catherine Needleman, for example. She has started doing digests of, she redacts everything, but by the time she gets sort of 10 stories, she puts them on her Facebook page, and she's now at 11. I mean, she's had hundreds of people write to her with these stories. There's sometimes there's suggestions we can make, people who like me, like Catherine, like Zemba, we're out about what happened to us. um you know Unfortunately, there's libel laws,
Right.
so you can't necessarily just kind of say, oh, this guy did this to me, because it's tends to be a he said she said kind of situation, and then that person can then sue you for libel. And as you know, the States is a very litigious society, and so that kind of thing is dangerous. But there will always be someone that you should be able to reach out to, even if it's a friend. Like, just get opinions, try to get help, and get somebody who will listen, who will have ideas about who to go to or what to do. And again, it's never isolated.
Right.
These incidents are never isolated. We
And
saw that.
it's never their fault.
No, of course not. We saw that with Bill Prusel. Um, there were many women that he abused. Zenova Bowers was the only one who came out with her own name, but that didn't mean she was the only one. She was the only one that was brave enough to go against such a position of power. And that's not saying that the other women aren't brave. They were, but to stay anonymous is, it's much easier for people to come together and and then try to go against one of these people who is given an inordinate amount of power. And I guess just the knowledge that you're not alone. It's never one person. I know I keep saying that, but it's there's always others. And so to try to find those, to at least, even if it's people who have graduated, alumni, there's always somebody who will know, oh yes, I heard about this, about that. It's not like, you can just go on Facebook and say, oh, this like, John Doe, or Joe Blogs or whatever did this. Anyone else? You can't do that, because then the guy will, but there's always a way of finding out.
Yeah.
We all talk to each other.
There's some really good Reddit threads out there as well on the topic.
Of course. Yeah. Yeah. And people there's people, I mean, I could probably name about 100 men right now that should not be doing what they're doing, but at the moment people don't want to come out about it. They don't want to be public. They don't see any kind of advantage, only a disadvantage. They might be too young. They might be scared of retribution for themselves, for their students in some cases, for their families.
Yeah,
It's scary. It's
it
scary.
is.
And for those who are not, for those who are trying to support people who have been abused or harassed, please know that it's very scary for the women and sometimes men. It's extremely scary,
Yeah. Yeah.
because everything is hinging. The whole, if this man could decide to change your whole career, of course it's
Yeah.
scary.
Yeah. Yeah. Lara, can you tell us more about the documentary? When is it coming out? When can we see it? Where can we catch it?
That's everybody would love to know that, including myself. I'm going to have a rough cut in about a month. It's now out with an editor. I do video editing, but I never done a full like documentary before. But yeah, I ended up going and speaking to 8 women in different countries, in various places, and I filmed it mostly myself, because I didn't want, some lighting guy there, or some, I wanted these women to be able to talk to somebody who knows it from the inside out, which is me. And I think they were able to really speak freely, and use their own names mostly. There's only one anonymous person, and that's because of a family religious situation, which is understandable. She would really like to be out about it, but worries that her her the male members of the family will blame her,
Hmm.
and she doesn't want that. So, but everybody else is completely front and center with their own names and their faces, and yeah, I think it's gonna pack quite a punch. I also
Yeah.
had to do quite a lot of research because England is just a morass of misconduct. I mean, it's terrible what's allowed over there. Still, only a few months ago did Royal College get rid of its head of strings, Mark Messenger. Again, everybody's known for years, for decades about that guy. Everybody knew about Jan Rutko, but that, they didn't care. They just didn't care.
Well, they cared more about their own interests and
Exactly. And this whole thing, like everybody knows, okay, let's do something about it. You know,
yeah,
let's give enough support to women so that they do feel strong enough to be able to become public.
yeah, yeah. And I'm really grateful that you spoke with me today because I feel that education it's getting there slowly, but there's still so much work to be done and the
Too slow.
institutions have to raise their standards significantly
Yeah,
higher and significantly faster. I agree with you. It is too slow.
it's way too slow. Yeah. I mean, it shouldn't be 2024 and here we are with like so Catherine has so many statistics like that are incredible. There's in almost all of the orchestras, there's maybe out of 16 principals, I think the most female is two or three in the top 20 orchestras. Um, for years, there was one woman conductor in the States, and that was Marin Alsop. She had Baltimore. 20 years later, here we are again. There's one woman conductor in the top 20. That's Natalie Stutzman of Atlanta. Why hasn't that changed? In 20 years, we're still in the same position as we were 20 years ago in regards to women in orchestras. And there's no actually that's not true. Detroit and Cincinnati have recently hired two terrific female concertmasters.
Yeah.
So that's kind of enheartening. There are little bits of shiny good news here and there, but yeah.
Still lots of work, but
And it's
I
not a lot of it's the same institutions. Like just a couple of weeks ago, the one lone tuba player who is a woman in all of the American orchestras, Carol Jansch, she came out and said she was fired from Curtis basically for being too young and for being a woman.
mhm,
Oh, by the same guy who lied to me and tried to shut up his alumni. So, because
lot of work.
and who knows why? They just didn't like feel like having her there, I guess.
Yeah. So, in closing, what's the one thing you think we can all start doing to be part of the solution and no longer enable the issues and the problems?
I think just awareness that it's out there. You know, Obviously for various reasons, I can't tell you these names of 100 men that I know about, but I know about them. It's out there. And believe me, every person that every woman in every orchestra has suffered some kind of harassment, sexism, misogyny to get to where they are today. And just if you're a guy, try to be an ally.
Mm,
If you're a woman, listen to your colleagues. You should be. If you're a woman, you should have. I don't want to say sympathy. That's not it exactly. I guess empathy. Just because there's these big fancy men over there, don't side with them just because you're scared of your career. It's just not worth it. Be on the moral side and not the wrong one.
mm. Lara, thank you so much for coming and speaking with me today. I feel that it's with people like you and all of the other advocates out there that we can change things, hopefully faster, but that we can create a culture that is, I'll say it one last time, more transparent,
Yes.
but where it's safe for everyone to operate, where there is support and where there's an openness and an eagerness to elevate everyone and higher standards for the way that that classical music field is
Women should be allowed to
conducted.
do what they love in this field happily and healthily. Full stop.
That's a perfect place to end. Thank you so much, Lara.
Thanks, René Paul.
There you have it. I want to thank Lara again for taking the time to speak with me. And I want to take a few minutes now to summarize some of the points Lara made and to include a few suggestions and things we can do to address sexual harassment in school and in the workplace. If you experience sexual harassment, take steps to protect yourself and seek support. Experts recommend documenting the incident as soon as it happens. Write down details such as dates, times, locations, what was said or done, and take note of any witnesses. This documentation can be crucial if you decide to report the incident. Next, don't hesitate to seek support. Speaking to someone you trust can help you feel less isolated and more empowered. If your workplace has a reporting mechanism, such as a Title IX officer or a specific HR contact, use it to make a formal complaint if you wish to. If your institution lacks clear procedures, consider contacting external bodies like unions or advocacy organizations. Also, educate yourself on your rights as an employee or student. Review your school or workplace's sexual harassment policy, local labor laws, and union guidelines to understand what protections are in place for you. Additionally, consider speaking with a legal advisor or counselor who specializes in workplace harassment. They can provide guidance on your options and help you navigate the reporting process. If you witness sexual harassment, it's equally important to take action. First, with permission, support the victim. As Lara said it so beautifully, listen, believe, and support. Start by approaching the person who experienced the harassment you witnessed and offering your support. Let them know you witnessed the incident and are willing to help them report it if they choose to do so. If the victim consents, report the incident to the appropriate authorities within your workplace, providing as much detail as possible to support their case. Keep a record of what you witnessed, including dates, times, and descriptions of the incident. Your documentation can serve as important evidence. Encourage a culture of zero tolerance for retaliation against those who report harassment. If you notice any retaliatory behavior, report it immediately. And for all of us, it's important to educate ourselves and become allies, not just about sexual harassment, but for any discrimination we observe. Becoming an ally involves educating ourselves about the dynamics of sexual harassment and or discrimination and their impact on victims so we can see it clearly and know what to do when we see it. We must participate in workshops, and training sessions, and discussions, and encourage our workplace to provide regular training on these topics. I know many of us roll our eyes when we have to take yet another training, but let's change our paradigm on this. Let's acknowledge the necessity of these trainings and realize our responsibility in changing the culture in our community. Very important here. Use your voice, and even more so if you hold a position of influence. Use it to advocate for change. Speak up during meetings. Support initiatives aimed at reducing harassment and ensure that the voices of victims are heard and respected. Advocate for a workplace culture that prioritizes respect and equality. Challenge inappropriate behavior and language when you see it, and support policies that promote a safe and inclusive environment. Push for your organization to adopt clear policies and procedures for handling sexual harassment. This includes creating reporting mechanisms, providing resources for victims, and ensuring transparency in how complaints are handled. Be vigilant and proactive by keeping an eye out for signs of harassment and addressing them promptly. Encourage open communication in your team so people feel safe sharing their concerns. For more support, consider reaching out to local unions or advocacy groups. They can provide additional resources and guidance. Seek help from professional counselors who specialize in dealing with workplace harassment, and consult with legal experts to understand your rights and the best course of action. Engage with community resources and support groups that offer a safe space for sharing experiences and gaining support. By educating ourselves, supporting victims, and advocating for policy changes, we can all play a role in creating safer and more supportive workplaces. It starts with awareness, and it's sustained through collective action and unwavering commitment to equality and respect. Over the past few months, I've had the opportunity to speak with several musicians, art administrators, as well as union representatives, and I'm particularly grateful to Karen Suarez Flint, Secretary Treasurer with the Chicago Federation of Musicians, for taking the time to sit with me for several hours and talking to me about two incredible initiatives that she's overseeing. And I do want to mention them here. The first one is the Change the Culture Committee, which Karen founded shortly after the publication of Sammy Sussman's article back in April. Fueled by a desire to be an agent of change, Karen assembled a powerful team of AFM women leaders. Together, and per their statement, in the interest of providing meaningful policies, reporting structures, and preventative education in the realm of discrimination, harassment, and sexual assault, the committee requested the adoption of 6 measures. I have a link to the official document for you in the show notes, and I will walk you through them briefly now. The Change the Culture Committee asks that, first, the AFM should adopt a code of conduct similar to those in other industry unions like the SAG-AFTRA and the Actors Equity. This code would clearly define unacceptable behaviors and ensure workplace safety. Second, the AFM website needs to be updated with this code of conduct and sexual harassment policy, along with clear pathways for reporting complaints. Examples of effective reporting mechanisms include the Chicago Federation of Musicians #NotMe app, which I will talk about next, and the Writers Guild of America's My Connects tool. Third, a working group should be formed to create and implement policies that support and protect members, especially vulnerable freelance and gig musicians. Fourth, informational flowcharts should be developed to guide musicians in different workplaces settings on how to resolve serious complaints. These charts should be distributed to local unions for further dissemination. Fifth, the union should encourage locals to standardize probationary processes to protect musicians from arbitrary actions. The Black Orchestral Network's 10 Steps Towards Equity in the Tenure Process is recommended as a resource. Lastly, the AFM must ensure that all members, local leaders, and players' committees have access to educational materials and training. This training should cover recognizing and reporting unlawful sexual harassment, understanding available options and protections, handling reports, and obtaining legal support. This is, I believe, a very important document and proposal, and I'm really happy to report that Karen has informed me it was presented to the International Executive Board meeting of the American Federation of Musicians on June 13, 2024, and that the IEB voted unanimously to accept those 6 recommendations. It will, of course, take time for these recommendations to be turned into action items, but Karen told me she's hopeful that meaningful, visible change will happen over the next few months. This goes to show that conversations sparked by the dissemination of information create real change when people step up and take action. The second thing that Karen and I discussed at length when we met was the tool made accessible to the CFM members here in Chicago by the Chicago Federation of Musicians Fair Employment Practice Committee, the hashtag Not Me app. The free app allows CFM members to report directly to the union if they feel that their rights have been violated, that things are not working the way they're supposed to in the workplace, or when they observed others being treated unfairly. This can include misconduct by colleagues, contractors, management, patrons, or anyone who has an impact on their workplace. Users can report anonymously if they choose to do so, and situations are handled respectfully, swiftly, and humanely by union representatives. The app allows union members to receive support and ensure they have an advocate for fair employment practices wherever they work. I have put links to information about the hashtag Not Me app in the show notes, and I hope you will check them out. Karen walked me through the hashtag Not Me app, and I was really impressed with how thorough and well thought out it is. And I want to mention it here on the show because I hope that anyone listening who is in a position to ensure that safe ways of reporting abuse are available to all musicians know that great tools are already in place. There are procedures already existing that they can use as models. And at the time I'm recording this podcast, there's been one interesting and fantastic development, which is that Local 802, that's New York City, will be implementing the hashtag Not Me app for their members as well. For sure, there's still so much work to be done, but it's great to see so many people be proactive in this fight. So, in closing, I hope this episode proves to be a helpful resource for you. I have included many links of supporting organizations and related articles in the show notes for you. If you found this episode helpful, please share it with anyone you think might benefit from the content. And let's keep the conversation going. Feel free to get in touch with me with your thoughts or questions. Together, we can work towards creating a safer and more supportive community. Once again, I want to acknowledge the courage and strength of the women who stand up, speak up, and continue to advocate for safety and equality for all in the classical music world. And I would like to end with the words of today's guest, Lara St. Listen, believe, and support. Together, let's build a community where everyone is able to do what they love in this field happily and healthily.